So I'm one of two. We grew up in Loughton in Essex. I always had a positive outlook on life, and I used to run around and enjoy my sport. I used to enjoy life. And I think where it changed was when Dad left. That's when my life started to drastically change. And it was at that stage that it was almost like a darkness came over me. And I started to hate people. I started to blame myself. I remember blaming myself for Dad leaving. So I remember as a young 16-year-old, I went up to London and I applied for a job in the city, and I got chatting with this big shot up there. Man, I said all sorts of things just to try and get this job, and you know, bless him, he bought it. And it transpired that I had some form of aptitude for this type of broking, this type of work that I was involved in. I'm now living this sort of character lifestyle in the city that was sort of revolving around money and girls and drinking and partying. It looked from the outside like I made it, but the truth is I was still pretty broken inside. And you know, I used to take a pleasure in hurting people as a young man. It was a very, very dark side of me that I used to try and keep under wraps. At the age of 17, I found myself in a friend's house in Epping, and they were quite keen on messing around with the occult practices. It would normally involve Ouija boards, so the practice of contacting the dead, or so I thought. One night, it got pretty bad. I thought I was trying to contact specifically, I think, my granddad again. It just came up 666, and the glass that was on the board was just uncontrollable. It was flying all over the place, but it kept spilling out 666. And it kept pointing at me that, Joe, doomed. I was going to die, you sinned, hell. And I couldn't understand why this thing was particularly affecting me and pointing at me and not the others that were doing this. And they were freaking out as well. And I remember after we'd done that, and I remember we all got together, and one of my mates said, oh, we need to say the Lord's Prayer. And I said, okay, look, whatever. So I was very fearful. And I remember I got on my motorbike, and I remember on the way home from Epping to Buckerstill, I remember saying, Jesus, if you're real, I need you. I didn't know why I was calling out to Jesus, but in my mind, it was pretty obvious that if there's a negative, there's got to be a positive. And I knew that the devil was bad, and I knew Jesus must have been good. And I kept well away from the witchcraft after that. I kept well away from that. About 6 months passed, and my mother had just started to go to church at St John's, Buckerstill. And Mum said, do you want to come to church with me this morning? And I remember saying, Mum, I'm not interested. About 5 minutes passed, and I'm lying in bed. And I heard a voice very clearly say, Joe, get up and go. And I remember looking around the room thinking, what was that? Was it my own voice? So I ignored it, totally ignored it. And then there was a second time, Joe, get up and go. And I remember I just sat up bolt right in bed, and I got changed. I said, Mum, I'm coming to church. And I think she was a little bit surprised. And as I walked through the doors of this church, I just got this overwhelming feeling of love, like I was being loved by a father I couldn't see. It was like somebody had lifted a veil from my eyes. Everything seemed vibrant. And I sat down in a breakout room, and this guy made a beeline for me, and I told him, you know, who I was and why I was sort of here. And I said, why are you here? And he said, well, I'm the vicar of the church. But we got on really well, and he started to just share some stuff with me, and then I just unloaded everything on him. I asked him all sorts of questions about spirituality and things that I'd experienced, and he sort of winced and said, you need to keep away from that sort of thing. And I didn't understand at the time, but then as time went on, I recognised the dangers of what I'd got myself involved in, and how serious that was, and how deceptive that was, and that it wasn't my granddad, and it wasn't the characters that I thought we were summoning up. It was actually demonic, it was evil, and it all made sense. And you'd probably say, well, did life get easier for you? But the truth of the matter is it didn't for me. I went through a year of the most horrendous nightmares, the most horrendous situations in my bedroom, in the house. Dials would spin around in my room on the heater, all sorts of crazy things. And in the middle of the night, I was lying there and I was in between sleeping. And all of a sudden, something grabbed me The room went ice cold and there was this high-pitched laughter. And in my head I started to say, Jesus, Jesus. And then the more I started to think it, the less control this thing had over me. That led me on a journey of spending a lot of time with the rector of the church, and he said, look, you need deliverance. You know, you need supernatural help. You need God to help you to get you out of this. And then a few months later, I was at a Christian conference, and I ended up going through a whole deliverance process. I mean, literally, you know, swearing, spitting, cursing. It was a situation where I was totally out of control. And after this deliverance process, it transpired that the guy that was praying for me worked in the city, and he didn't just work in the city, he worked in the same job that I was doing, and he worked over the road to me. We ended up meeting up after work and during lunch times, and it was then I really started to develop my faith, and my life started to change. When you've gone through the darkness that I went through, and your only hope is God, look at the accounts of Jesus. Ask him into your life. He's real. He's the Son of God. And the Bible says who the Son sets free is free indeed. And he changed my life, and he can change it for you too.